Okay, so can you see that okay? All right, fantastic. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide, and so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Esme. I'm the admissions coordinator at Newnham College. So Cambridge is made up of lots of different colleges, and I'm an admissions coordinator at one of them. And I've worked for the university for around 12 years. So I know the Cambridge process pretty well, but I'll just let Amber introduce herself, and then Dan, in case we had anyone that logged in just a few minutes late, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Amber. I'm the Deputy Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Pembroke College and the Head of Widening Participation there. So one of the other colleges in Cambridge. I've been at Pembroke for about 5 years now, but before that I've worked at various other universities. So I've worked in Widening Participation and Outreach at UCL in London, and also at Queen Mary University in London as well. And I've also worked at the University of Leicester too. So a few other places as well. Yeah.
Fantastic, thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan. I'm the Higher Education Project Coordinator at Refugee Education UK. A big part of my role is giving advice and guidance to young people from a forced migration background about how they can access and progress in higher education.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Amber to do a few slides here. So fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Esme. So one of the things that we thought it might be helpful to discuss is the different types of universities that you can get in the UK. They generally fall into 3 different categories, but it's something that I think is really worth thinking about when you're considering applying to university, because it affects what the atmosphere is like of the university and the sort of experience that you have whilst you're there. So as you can see from the screen, 3 types of universities that there are in the UK are campus universities, city universities, and collegiate universities. And what that basically means is, for any of them, if you go to them, you'll go to lectures and seminars, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and you'll get your degree at the end. But it's more about the environment that you're in whilst you're there. So for a campus university, for example, pretty much everything to do with your university and with your time at university is based on one site. So a really good example is Warwick. They've got their one campus, they've got their students' union on there. So the place where you can go for the clubs and societies and that sort of things. The libraries are on that same site. It's where the teaching happens, and crucially, it's also where the students live. So if you go to a campus university, you'll be on this one site. You'll probably be bumping into students that you know quite often, because everybody is around on that one main site. And you don't need to leave it if you don't want to at all. So I think that Warwick, for example, again, has got like a cinema on their site and things like that as well. Obviously you can leave it and go to nearby towns and whatever else, but everything that you need is on that site. A city university is kind of the polar opposite to a campus university. So a campus university, you're in this one place. A city university, all of the different aspects of your university life are spread out across the city that you're in. So Sheffield is a really great example of this. You'll have a building that houses the Students' Union in one part of the city. You'll have an accommodation block in another part of the city. You'll be travelling to one of your departments in a different part of the city for maybe some of your lectures, and then maybe travelling somewhere else for some of your other teaching. So you'll spend a lot of your time as a student sort of travelling around the city, but you become much more engaged with the city life because of that, because you're living in the city, moving around it, going to different places. So it's a little bit more probably anonymous, because you're less likely to bump into people as much as that you know, as much as you might do in a campus university, because obviously you've got everybody else in the city there as well. So it creates quite a different type of atmosphere. And I think that's something that's really worth thinking about when trying to figure out what type of university it is that you might want to go on to study at. The third type up there is a collegiate university, and that is what Cambridge is, it's what Oxford is. Durham is also a collegiate university, and they're slightly different in that they have the same structures as a city or a campus university would have. So you'll still have your students' union, and you still have your departments and things like that. But they also have colleges, and colleges are quite a big part of students' life while they're at a collegiate university. So as Esme said, she works at Newnham College, I work at Pembroke College, and it's the colleges that admit the students at those unis. And they are, well, both Oxford and Cambridge. They'll sort of provide your accommodation for the whole time of your undergraduate degree, and they're a much more integral part of student life than perhaps a hall of residence might be elsewhere. Can we have the next slide, please? Awesome. So I mentioned a few terms in that previous slide about where students live, and I mentioned halls of residence, and I mentioned colleges. But where students live will vary from uni to uni and from year to year. So that's also something else that you might want to consider. So the majority of universities in the UK will have halls of residence that may be owned by the university that first year students will go into. Depending on the university, you may be able to stay during term time. You will be able to stay during term time. You may be able to stay out of term time, but you may not. So that's something that might be worth looking into and considering a little bit more if that's something that's going to be helpful or important for you. For most unis, after your first year, students will tend to try and find private accommodation in their second, third and beyond years if they're at university for longer than 3 years. So that's where they might be renting a house from a private landlord with friends or with people that they've met in their first year. So for most unis, that's what you'll be doing. There are quite often in cities now sort of halls of residence that are privately owned that can provide rooms for students for you to rent as well. But a lot of students will still choose to live in private houses. And obviously, if you do that, then the rent that you'll pay will be for the year. You'll take on a 52-week contract, and so you'll be paying for the time that you're not necessarily at university as well if you go somewhere else during the holidays. But it does also mean that you can definitely stay there if that's where you want to be during the university holidays. Now, Oxford and Cambridge are slightly different again, and that comes down to being collegiate universities too, because they do provide accommodation nearly always for at least 3 years of your undergraduate degree, but they also only charge you for the time that you're in residence. So when you're at Oxford, if you went to Oxford or Cambridge, you wouldn't need to find private accommodation yourself after your first year. You would still have collegiate accommodation, and you pay for it whilst the time that you're there. And you can often choose to stay during the holidays and make an arrangement with your college in order to enable you to do that. Now, depending on the university and the college, there might be financial support available for you as well to help pay your accommodation costs. But the thing that Dan mentioned in his session earlier about the barriers comes into play here as well, because each university is individual. There's not a general fund that applies to all universities as to whether or not there is financial support available. So it's a matter of looking at the universities that you're interested in and seeing whether or not they have got financial support that would be applicable to you, and which can be quite a time-consuming task, unfortunately, and something else for you guys to be considering. Have the next slide, please. Thanks. So I said that I would mention a little bit more about how students learn at university. And again, I think that this is something that's actually quite useful for you to think about when thinking about what type of university it is or where it is that you want to go to study. Because some universities will have a stronger focus on some teaching styles, and some courses will have more contact hours, the hours where you're being taught face-to-face, than others. And some of them will also sort of weigh your success, so give your qualification according to different criteria. So for some universities, coursework will play a much larger role than others, where it might be much more assessment based. But I'll just generally talk about the sort of learning styles and teaching styles that happen at universities as well, to give you hopefully the broad knowledge to then understand some more research that you might go on to do yourselves. So Lectures are the first sort of teaching style, and they happen at all universities. So lectures are the large group teaching. So it might be you and, depending on the size of your course, everybody else in your year who's studying that particular course or the particular module within that course in a room with somebody at the front talking to you, giving you information and you taking notes. Then you're expected to sort of go and do some extra reading yourself afterwards. So lectures aren't at all aren't very interactive. If you're confident enough, you may put your hand up to ask a question, but I was never confident enough at university to do that, and there is absolutely no pressure to do so. So generally in lectures, you're sitting there, you're being given information that you can then go and read up on yourself afterwards in a large room with perhaps over 100 other people in that room. Seminars tend to be much smaller, and again, universities across the UK will offer seminars. So these are much smaller teaching. It may be 10 to 15 people perhaps in a seminar. You may have been given some reading or some work to do beforehand, and you'll be discussing topics in your seminar. Now, because they are much smaller, you do need to contribute a little bit more to seminars than you do to lectures. Again, I normally tried to be fairly quiet in seminars, but as I got more confident as the years progressed, I was willing to contribute a little bit more. But the more that you put in, the more that you get out. So contributing to seminars is a really helpful thing to do. And again, your seminar group for your particular module will be probably the same across the term. So you'll get to know the other people there, and you'll get to know the person delivering the seminar who's a specialist in that subject area. So there might be somebody doing a PhD, so doing a postgraduate qualification, or there might be a lecturer or a professor in that subject. So yeah, they're normally about 10 to 15 people, and it's much more discussion based than the lecture. Now, Oxford and Cambridge have got a type of teaching that doesn't exist at other universities in the UK, and that's supervisions or tutorials. And I'll just touch on these very briefly because they're not relevant to the majority of unis. The supervisions and tutorials are really small group teaching. So it's you and maybe one or two other students in a room, and you'll be discussing probably an essay that you've written the week before, or a lab report that you've done, or something that's applicable to your subject, with an expert in your subject area. So as I said, you, one or two other people, that's a fairly small group, and you can't hide in those, you can't not contribute to those at all. But they are really personalised teaching that you then get, and if you are having problems in any particular area, it means that that's spotted and that you're given the help that you need to make sure you fully understand that particular subject. So yeah, there's something that's also that happens at Oxford and Cambridge. So any scientists or prospective scientists watching this will also have labs or practicals, which are self-explanatory really by the word. People studying essay-based subjects will not have these, but again, you'll have these regularly during term time. You'll have them for different subjects, and you'll be doing experiments, you'll be writing reports and things like that. So if you're thinking of a science-based subject, you will be having labs and practicals as well. The other type of learning that's really important at university is independent learning, and that's because a lot of your learning needs to be really self-directed. You do have all of the teaching styles that we've discussed above, but a lot of it will give you some information, and you then need to go away and find out more and do more reading around the subject, or do more maths problems or whatever it might be yourself to make sure that you fully understand that subject. So independent learning and motivating yourself and going to the library and all those sort of things, and making sure that you get your work done on time, is a little bit different to some of the educational experiences that you may have had previously as well, but I think something quite valuable at uni. Have the next slide, please, Esme. Thanks. So hold on, I just need to move the videos of where we are. So another thing for you guys to be thinking about, and this is a big one, is what can you study, or what it is that you want to study. Now, in the UK, there are over 52,000 degree courses on offer for you to consider, for you to choose. But when you apply to university, you can apply for 5 different courses. So that narrows it, you know, it makes it slightly less daunting, but not very much. But when we say that there are 52,000 courses on offer, that's because a course that's got the same name at different universities will count as different degrees, because they'll be covering different topics. So history at Cambridge will be different to history at Leeds, for example. So that also helps narrow it down. But when it comes to thinking about what course it is that you want to apply to, it should be something that you're genuinely interested in. It is a really important decision because that's what you'll be focusing on for 3 to 6 years. And it's normally just one subject that you can pick. Sometimes you might be able to do a joint or a combined degree where you'll be studying more than one subject. So you might, for example, be able to do history and politics, or a language and something else. But it should definitely be what you enjoy. And that's how you should go about trying to narrow down what you want to study. Think about what subjects you like, think about what subjects you find interesting, and then look at what options there are that would fit that. So a lot of courses at university do say that you need to have qualifications before coming, and they may specify the subjects that those qualifications need to be in. So again, it's worth checking that you have the right qualifications, and universities should advertise this on their websites. Or you're very welcome to get in touch with them, and hopefully you'll find somebody who'll be able to give you some good advice. But yeah, so you might need to have specific qualifications beforehand, but you're always welcome to get in touch with universities to discuss if you're not sure. And the other thing to think about as well, I suppose, is that if you know what career you want to go in, then that might help decide what course it is that you want to apply for. For most, it won't, because for most careers or most jobs, they don't specify what degree you need. But if you want to be a doctor, then you need to study medicine. If you want to be a dentist, you need to study dentistry. So there are a handful where the two do correlate closely. So that's worth just double checking as well. I think that's it for me for now, isn't it? Oh no, one more thing, sorry. So very quickly, when you go to university, it is a really comprehensive experience. It's not just going, and it's not just about the studying, it's about the whole experience that you get from being there. And there's loads of stuff for students to do beyond just studying. So universities have got, I mentioned earlier, students' unions. So it's students' unions at universities that have clubs and societies from a whole host of different areas. So there'll be sports clubs, there'll be cultural clubs, there's often language clubs, religious societies, anything that you can think of, there's likely to be a club or a society that you can join, where you can meet either like-minded people or people with similar interests to you. So you can sort of meet people that way, make friends that way, but also just do stuff that you enjoy and have fun doing as well. I mentioned sports, there's loads of sports that you can get involved with, but I think some of the real benefits of going to university are the things beyond the education, in that you get to meet people from lots of different places, from lots of different backgrounds, with lots of different life experiences, which I found really eye-opening and interesting when I went to university. You get to explore new places, you may choose to move to a different city, and you get to find out what that city is like. And you just get to try loads of new stuff. You may know some things that you enjoy already and join a club or a society along those lines, but you may find something that you've never heard of and be able to give that a go as well. And because it's this whole experience, there's loads of support to enable you to do those sort of things too. So yeah, now it is that for it from me, and I'll hand over to Dan to talk a little bit about finance.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Amber. That was brilliant. And yeah, I'll just move on to Dan here. Can I just double check that you can definitely, you've just got the big slide in front of you. Okay, cool. That is working all right then. Okay, Dan, you've got the next 2 slides. And just to note that there's a couple of links on here, and they'll be placed on the web page where this recording is. So if you don't catch it, then you can find it elsewhere.
Great, thank you very much. I've got the horrible task of talking about how you pay for university, because unfortunately it does cost some money. And just to say that to work out what tuition fees a university is going to charge you, a university will classify you as either a home student or an international or overseas student. So home student or international student. And this, how they classify you will depend on what your current immigration status is. Now, this is quite complicated and it often does change as well. So if you're listening to this later on in the future, if you're listening to the recording, it's best just to probably get in contact with someone on the panel. I think our email addresses are at the end, just to see if this has changed. But at the moment, if you have refugee status or humanitarian protection or Calais leave, Section 67 or stateless leave, you will probably be classified as a home student by a university. And what that means is that you're basically going to be treated exactly the same as a British student. The university is going to charge you around about £9,250 per year as tuition fees. And also you are probably going to be eligible for something called student finance. And student finance is the loans that the UK government give to young people to help them pay for university. And you can get two different types of loans through student finance. The first is a loan to pay the tuition fees. This loan gets paid, if you apply for student finance, this loan gets paid directly to the university. So they won't be sending you £9,000 a year. You wouldn't see that. That would go straight to the university. And the second type of loan that you might be able to get is called the maintenance loan. And this is to help you pay for all the kind of additional costs of going to university. So accommodation, food, clubs and societies. And this is the loan that will get paid directly to you in stages. So as well as that, if you are eligible for student finance and you're a home student, you might also be able to apply to different internal bursaries or grants or hardship funds that different universities might offer. And there should always be at universities a student advice team or a funding team who will be able to advise you about applying to these internal bursaries. So that's the case if you're classified as a home student. At the moment, unfortunately, if you are an asylum seeker, so you still have a pending asylum claim, or if you have limited leave to remain, discretionary leave to remain, or UASC leave, so unaccompanied asylum seeking child leave, it's likely that you'll be classified by university as an overseas international student. And what this means is that the university is going to charge you higher fees, and sometimes it can be much higher. And unfortunately, you also won't be eligible to apply for student finance, the loans that the UK government give. Now, as I say, this does change all the time. Eligibility changes all the time. So this might have changed in the future. So can we just go on to the next slide? So if you are in the position where you're probably not going to be classified as a home student and you're not going to be eligible for student finance, how on earth would you be able to fund university? Well, luckily, as I mentioned briefly earlier, there are about 80 universities at the moment who have special scholarships in place for students exactly in this position, students who don't have access to student funding. And the scholarships that these universities offer, they all have different names, but they're usually called either sanctuary scholarships, equal access scholarships, or Article 26 scholarships. And they're designed exactly to help students who are not eligible for student funding to pay for university. Now, each university who offer these scholarships offer something slightly different. So you would need to read exactly what the scholarship offer is. But often what they'll do is they'll pay your fees and they'll give you some money for your living costs. But there are some universities whose scholarship just pays the fees, and then you'd have to try and cover your living costs yourself. I think on this slide, there's a link to the Star Network webpage, which is the best webpage to find out which of the universities in the UK have these scholarships. And also it has links to the individual scholarship page at each university. So if you click on those links, and follow the links through, you can read about exactly what the scholarship offer is from each university. Update the information about the scholarships almost every month, so that information will be updated up to date as often as possible. I think I briefly mentioned in the first section, I might just quickly mention it again now. There are some universities at the moment, about 10 or 11 in the UK, who, if you're an asylum seeker and they classify you as an international student, whilst you'll always legally be classified as an international student, the university has used its discretion and chosen only to charge you home fees. So you still unfortunately won't be eligible for student finance, but the university will only charge you £9,000 a year. So if you are in a position where you might be able to self-fund your degree of £9,000, it might be worth looking at applying to one of those 10 or 11 universities that at the moment charge asylum seekers home fees. If you want more information about that, my email address is at the end of the presentation and I can tell you more about that. I think it's over to you, Esme.
Thank you, that's brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for going into more detail there. And also I just want to thank Amber as well, who I think needs to go in a moment, but thanks very much for Amber for being here today as well. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide and go a little bit more into applying to university and more of the process of it, so more of the technical side. It is complicated, but it's what universities are there to do, is to help you get through this process and to explain it to you. So never be shy to contact a university and ask them what their process is, or what something means, or why they're asking for it, because that's what admissions officers are there for, is to explain these things. So the basic process is that the UK uses a system called UCAS, the University and Colleges Admission Service, and that's basically where pretty much any university you want to apply to in the UK, you make an application via UCAS. So that's your sort of central point for making applications in the UK. So that's the website you need to get to know. You can apply to between 1 and 5 universities. We call them choices at UCAS. Dan touched on the cost earlier, so it's £22 for 1 university choice and 26 for 5 university choices. So that's a cost to sort of bear in mind. The things that we look at, which you'll enter in your UCAS application, are things like your previous academic performance. So in the UK, these are GCSE grades, A-level grades. That's the sort of more standard background. But we entirely appreciate that if you're coming from another country, then you may well have studied other academic qualifications. Dan mentioned earlier about UK NARIC. It's now called ECTIS, ECCTIS. And from there, I understand that you can get sort of certification of what your qualification is, and that it's equivalent to what the university is asking for. But if that's not possible, if you're not able to contact ECTIS, again, contact the universities that you're applying for, explain your situation, and they'll be able to help you as to what they'll need you to provide, and the best way about doing that. But enter all of the academic qualifications that you've taken onto your UCAS application, and also the university will get in touch with you. If they're not sure what a qualification is, then they'll get in touch with you and ask you about it. The other things to put onto your UCAS application, the most important bits, is the personal statement and the reference. So you do one personal statement and reference for all the universities you're applying for. So make sure you don't say, I really want to apply to Exeter because, on your personal statement, because that will go to all of the universities you're applying for. Your personal statement is a great place for you to talk about the preparation you've done, both academically, so the qualifications you studied previously, the subjects you've studied, why they're relevant, or what you've learned in those, and how that's relevant to the courses you're applying for. And it's also the best place, and this is the most important thing I think about personal statement, is for you to show your motivation for the subject, your passion for it, why you're really interested in it, what fascinates you about it, and also any sort of extra reading around the subject or any engagement in what we call super curriculars, which I'll touch on a bit later on. So that's the place to put this is in your personal statement. You also need an academic reference, so that would need to be provided either by a school if you're attending school in the UK, or it could be someone who just knows you academically, or potentially, Dan might know this, but potentially I'd imagine that someone from Refugee Education could perhaps provide a reference if you don't have somebody who can talk about your academic performance. But again, it's something you get in touch, if you're not sure, get in touch with the universities that you're applying to and ask them what they think would be good, because I'm quite sure they'll be reassuring that there is a way for you to get around this. It just might not seem straightforward to you, but chances are they'll have had people in your situation before and they'll know the answer, or they'll be able to find an answer. So you make your applications by the relevant deadline, which I'll talk about in a second, and then you hear back from your university. Depending on the universities, it can take longer, sometimes take shorter, depending on how in-depth they assess their applications. And you'll hear whether you get an offer or whether you don't get an offer. And some universities, particularly Oxford and Cambridge, will invite you to an interview if they are interested in making you an offer. So I'm just going to skip on to the next slide and just very briefly talk about the difference between Oxford and Cambridge, or why Oxford and Cambridge are different to other universities. So most universities, if you're applying, their deadline is the 26th of January for entry in the same year. Oxford and Cambridge have a deadline of the 15th of October, and that's just because they do a super in-depth assessment process. They assess applications on a very individual basis and very holistically, which is great, but it means that they need a bit longer to assess the applications. Also, so if you're applying for medicine, veterinary medicine or dentistry, then you need to apply by the 15th of October. And that means you need to submit your UCAS application to all your choices by the 15th of October. As Amber touched on earlier, you can, if you're applying to Oxford and Cambridge, you can choose a college to consider your application if you have a preference, if you like Newnham or if you like Pembroke or whatever. It really doesn't matter though. If you're not bothered, then we'll just randomly allocate you a college and then it will just be the same from there on in. At Cambridge in particular, most applicants will probably need to take some kind of admissions test. For most of our subjects, that's a requirement. So there are nationwide other universities you might need to take an admissions test, and particularly for certain areas like law or medicine, there'll be an admissions test that you'd need to take. But at Cambridge, most of our courses require you to take an admissions test, and that's just so we can sort of have that extra bit of information to assess you on. And then if we're interested in making you an offer, then we'll invite you to interview, and that would be in December. Oh, this is a little bit odd. I wasn't expecting this, but I'm going to flick through and see whether I can just go through the whole thing. Otherwise, I get surprises, and I'm not a massive fan of surprises on PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm going to cover a little bit about like all universities, but also this does concentrate a bit on Cambridge as well. So you choose the course that you want to study, which Amber covered earlier. Have a good think about what you think you'd like, and the different courses at different universities, and then the same course at different universities and the difference in content. Then if you're applying to Cambridge, then you or Oxford, you can choose a college, or you can make an open application, and that's where we just randomly allocate you, and that's fine. Again, if you're applying to Cambridge or Oxford, then check to see whether you're going to need to take a test, or we call them admissions assessments, but check whether you're going to need to do that. If you do, then some of them are in November, in which case you'd need to register by the 15th of October. So that's something to kind of think ahead on. and then you submit your UCAS application by the 15th of October. So I believe that that's for all university choices. So if you're submitting an application for Cambridge, you'll have had all of your other university choices done by that same time as well. And then at Cambridge, you complete the supplementary application questionnaire, which is where we just ask you a few additional things. And it's also an opportunity for you to be able to say why you want to apply to Cambridge, or if we have some sort of oddly individual courses. So you might want to say why you're particularly interested in our course, etc. And some colleges at Cambridge will ask for you to submit some written work. This is obviously mainly just based in essay-based subjects, so we can see the kind of writing that you do. And then again at Cambridge, you'd be invited to interview, and possibly you'd have an admissions test then, or so it'd either be in early November or it would be in mid-December around your interview time. And then you get a decision in late January, and late January being when the normal application deadline is for most universities. So we do everything pretty early, but we go really in depth on an individual basis. And then you get your decision in late January. It varies from university to university, dependent. So if you submit your UCAS application by the 15th of October for all your choices, then other universities might consider your application sort of at the same kind of time as Cambridge or Oxford do, or they might just wait until they get all their applications at the end of January, at the 26th of January deadline. So it just varies from university to university, course to course, and that kind of thing. So the information that we use, what universities use when we're assessing applications. So I've got some emboldened here, and that's what everybody uses. And then I've got 3 which are not embold, and those are specific for Cambridge and Oxford. But so prior academic achievement, so like we talked about earlier, what academic performance you've already done already, so be it in the UK, be it abroad, that's what we'd like to see, to be able to see how you've been doing so far. Predicted grades, if you're studying in the UK, then you might have some grade predictions of how you're likely to do in your exams. So this is quite particular to A-levels. So that if you're doing A-levels, then we'd like to see some predicted grades and to see what you're expected to achieve in your exams. And then the personal statement that we've already covered, showing why you're dead interested in the course and what really fascinates you about the area. Your UCAS reference, so that's the academic reference, and finally extenuating circumstances. So I'm going to cover this more on the next slide, just because it's something really important that not everybody is aware of, that we really need to know. So I'm going to cover that in a second. And then interviews, written work, admissions tests or assessments, that's very Cambridge and Oxford specific again. So extenuating circumstances. This is where you've had any disruption to your education for personal reasons, and if you are applying as somebody from a forced migration background, I'd imagine that this is pretty important for you. So you really ought to let us know if you've had any type of disruption to your education, be it 10 years ago, be it last year, be it 3 years ago, whatever. We do need to know about it, because it gives us the opportunity to understand either, okay, so your grades weren't so fantastic like at that point, but oh, hang on a minute, we know they have really like hard extenuating circumstances, and that's going to give us some understanding as to why. Or we're going to see that you've really struggled and you've still got amazing grades, then that is absolutely astonishing. So it's really important that we have that information. At Cambridge, I can tell you we've got something called the extenuating circumstances form, and that's an online form that we ask either your school or a social worker or a doctor, or it can be someone from refugee education, some kind of mentor. They can complete that on behalf of you, and they don't have to go into like much detail, it's absolutely fine. If it's sensitive and you'd rather we not know too much, just a brief outline is really, really helpful to us. So they complete that. That's on the university website. And if you contact me, I can tell you where to do where that is. Equally, you can email us if that's what you'd rather. You know, any way that you tell us, as long as you tell us, that's the important thing. And then moving away from Cambridge, I can't speak for other universities, but I'm for sure they will want to know about any extenuating circumstances. So have a look on their websites to see how they like to be informed of these things. It might be they have a form like we do, or it might be that they like an email or a letter from somebody who can sort of just outline briefly the situation. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we do hear at least sort of an outline of what you've been through, what's disrupted your education. Okay, so basically, what are universities looking for? I think that some people just think that this, you know, not that this is a secret, but that we just maybe like that it seems like a great unknown, and I think that it's important to do research and speak to people in admissions offices across different universities, because we want to tell you what it is that we're looking for, and I'm sure that you can meet that. So, I mean, okay, to cover the basic bit of ground, it's academic ability. So have a look on the university websites and check that you are going to meet their entry requirements. Or if you're not sure because you your qualifications aren't listed on the university website, then just get in touch with the university and ask them if that's sufficient preparation for the course. We also want to see a commitment to study, so show that you are really interested in your subject, you want to be doing everything that you can to learn about it. And that's supercurriculars again, which I'm just going to cover in the next slide. Academic potential. So are you looking to be on course to keep on going and getting the grades that you're getting, and are you going to thrive in a university environment? Are you going to enjoy the sort of the teaching methods in university, and is it something that's going to suit you, because university doesn't suit everybody? And finally, independent thought as well. It's really great to see that you have your own viewpoints. We want to hear about people who've got their opinions on what's happening in the world, or what they see in front of them, but also be challenged on them, and to be able to be challenged on them, and to see different viewpoints as well, or argue their viewpoint as the most important. We just want to see that. Okay, so I'm going to just briefly cover supercurriculars, because we have run over quite a bit, but supercurriculars are things that you can do in your own time to learn more about the course that you're interested in, or the subject area, and then you can put that in your personal statement. It's a really great way to show that you're really motivated for the area that in which you're applying to university. And you can do this in all sorts of ways. Some you might need to, there may be a few that you would need to pay for, but for the very most part, it's free. You can find these things free. If you've got access to internet, then you'll be able to find it. So you can, particularly now with COVID, there's so many online lectures and events that you can take part in. I'd really, really recommend, if you've got access to YouTube, to watch some TED Talks, or just Google sort of the subjects that you're interested in and just see what comes up. And then if you're able to, then you can go and see sort of museums and see things that you're interested in. A lot of them are free, and if you look on the museum website, you'll see if it's free or what sort of discounts there are. Reading books, reading around the subjects that you're interested in is always really helpful. And podcasts, I'm a massive fan of podcasts. You can just learn about anything on podcasts. They're brilliant. And work experience, that can be useful in particular for some subjects like medicine. Some universities will ask for a specific number of hours of work experience. Others, so Cambridge, we like to see work experience for medicine if it's possible, but we do understand how hard it is to get. We don't have set requirements. And also, we're very, very aware of the fact that it's impossible to get work experience at the moment during the pandemic. So it's entirely reasonable if you haven't been able to. And that's where exploring these other supercurriculars can be really useful. So I think I've kind of rushed through quite a bit, and I know that we've sort of sped through a lot of information and we've run over quite a bit. But I don't think we've got any questions that have come up. I'm just going to outline the email addresses if you want to get in touch with Amber or Dan or myself. And here's some useful links as well, which are going to be on the webpage where this recording is held, so you can access those yourself. So it's the UCAS website, Refugee Education, which is where Dan is based, and the UK Council for International Student Affairs, which goes into great depth and detail about fee status, HE Plus and Explore, which are really fantastic resources for finding supercurricular activities, and Discover Downing in Sydney Sussex Beyond the Syllabus, which are specifically Cambridge based, and there's got some fantastic supercurricular suggestions as well. So that's, I think, pretty much where I'm going to leave things. I hope that everybody that's been here, I'm aware that you might just watch one of the sessions or both of the sessions, but if you've stayed on for the whole time, thank you very much. I don't know if anybody else wants to turn their camera back on and say goodbye, but I really hope that this has been helpful to some extent and that you can get more involved in the other events that we're planning on running. And I'm sure Dan can suggest things that that you're running as well that can be really useful to students in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone ever has any questions about any aspect that we've talked about or anything wider than that, please do drop me an email on the email that's on the presentation, and yeah, I'd be happy to try and help in whatever way I can.
Thank you, and likewise, please do get in touch with me. I'm always happy to help. Tuba, did you want to say anything to finish things off?
Actually, just a big thanks to everybody who's been part of this. I really appreciate taking all this time, and I know Dan had a rough day today and he joined us nonetheless. So thank you all very much for joining, and I think this will be really a useful start to furthering access to higher education.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, fantastic. Okay, have great evenings, everybody. And I'm going to close this off now. Thank you. Bye.